I believed leaving would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that leaving didn't mean escape. The car moved steadily through the fog, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the gray mass ahead. The road stretched forward in a way that felt familiar, almost comforting, like muscle memory guiding my hands on the wheel. I had driven this route countless times before, back when Hollow Creek was just another place on the map, and not something that watched you leave. The engine hummed softly, steady and obedient, and for a few moments I let myself believe that everything behind me was fading. The house, the valley, the voice, the weight on my shoulder. I focused on the sound of tires on asphalt, on the rhythmic flick of the turn signal as I followed the curve of the road. Then I passed the sign. "Welcome to Hollow Creek." I frowned, slowing the car as the wooden sign slid past my window, its white paint chipped and peeling, letters warped by years of weather. My heart skipped, then stumbled, trying to find a rational explanation. I must have missed a turn earlier. Maybe the fog was thicker than I thought. Maybe I looped around without realizing it. I kept driving. The road curved again, just like before. Same bend, same cluster of trees leaning inward, same shallow ditch running alongside the pavement. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as a familiar unease crawled up my spine. The fog thinned for a moment, and I saw the road stretch out ahead. And there it was again. "Welcome to Hollow Creek." This time, the sign looked newer, the wood less splintered, the letters darker, as if recently repainted. I slowed to a stop, the car idling beneath me, my breath shallow and cold in my chest. The valley was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no birds, no distant hum of traffic, just the soft ticking of the engine and the faint crackle of cooling metal. I checked the dashboard clock. It was wrong. The time flickered for a split second, then settled on a number that made no sense, minutes ahead of where it should have been. I tapped the glass, thinking it was a glitch, but the display remained steady. When I looked back at the road, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the sign entirely. I drove on. The third time I saw the sign, I didn't slow down. I didn't react at all. My body felt numb, like it had decided panic would only make things worse. The road felt narrower now, the trees pressing closer, their branches tangling overhead like ribs forming a tunnel. The fog rolled low, hugging the asphalt, creeping over the tires as if trying to climb up into the car. I told myself to keep moving. Speed meant distance. Distance meant safety. The pendant on the passenger seat shifted slightly as the car hit a small bump. The sound of metal tapping against plastic was sharp in the quiet. I glanced at it instinctively, my chest tightening. It lay there exactly as I had left it, dull silver catching the faint light from the dashboard. For a moment, I thought I saw it turn. Not physically, not visibly, just a sense that it had oriented itself toward me, like a compass needle settling into place. I shook my head and looked back at the road. The fog broke suddenly. The trees parted and the road straightened, opening into a familiar stretch of pavement. My breath caught as recognition hit me harder than fear. The cracked asphalt, the uneven shoulder, the mailbox leaning at an unnatural angle. My driveway. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding slightly before coming to a stop at the foot of the hill. The engine sputtered, then fell silent. I sat there, frozen, staring at the house at the top of the drive. It hadn't moved. It hadn't changed. It was waiting. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, glowing faintly in the fog. The windows stared back at me, dark and unblinking. For a moment, I wondered if I had blacked out on the road, if I had turned around without realizing it. But my body remembered every second of that drive, every bend, every sign. The valley hadn't let me leave. I stepped out of the car slowly, my legs stiff, my breath visible in the cold air. The silence pressed in around me, thick and heavy, as if the world beyond the property line had been muted. Even the fog seemed different here, denser, clinging to the ground in slow, deliberate movements. As I walked up the driveway, a strange sensation settled in my chest. Not fear exactly, but something closer to resignation, like returning to a conversation I never finished. The gravel crunched beneath my feet, loud in the stillness. Each step felt measured, observed. The front door stood exactly as I had left it, unlocked. The moment I noticed that, a chill slid through me. I was certain I had locked it, certain I had checked the handle twice before leaving. I hesitated on the porch, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing. I pushed the door open. The air inside the house was warmer than it should have been. Not comforting warmth, stale, trapped warmth, like a room that had been occupied too recently and not aired out. The smell of old wood and dust lingered beneath it, threaded with something faintly metallic. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The house felt wrong in a quieter way than before. Not hostile, not overtly threatening, just attentive. The hallway stretched ahead, shadows pooling along the edges, refusing to settle. I set the camera down on the small table by the door and glanced around, grounding myself in the familiar shapes of furniture and walls. The living room clock ticked softly. It hadn't been ticking before. I approached it slowly, watching the second hand move with deliberate precision. Each tick echoed a little too loudly, like the house wanted me to notice that time was moving again. I checked my phone. No signal. No missed calls. No new notifications. The time on my phone didn't match the clock on the wall. A faint sound drifted from upstairs. Not a footstep, not a creak. A shift. Like someone adjusting their weight on a mattress. My throat tightened. I stood very still, listening. The sound didn't repeat, but the warmth in the air felt stronger now, concentrated toward the staircase. I swallowed and took a step forward. The floorboard beneath my foot creaked. The sound upstairs stopped. I stood there, my heart pounding, every sense stretched thin. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. Slowly, I moved toward the staircase, one careful step at a time. The warmth grew more noticeable the closer I got, as though the second floor existed in a different temperature altogether. When I reached the base of the stairs, I looked up. The hallway above was dim, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. My sister's door stood closed at the far end, just as it always had when she was alive. For a brief, irrational moment, I expected to hear her voice telling me to stop hovering, to either come up or leave her alone. I climbed. Each step groaned softly, the sound traveling upward and vanishing before it could echo back. When I reached the top, the warmth hit me fully, wrapping around my shoulders and face. It felt lived in, recent. I approached her door slowly. The handle was warm to the touch. I froze, my fingers hovering just above it, my breath shallow and unsteady. That shouldn't have been possible. The house had been empty for years. No heat upstairs, no reason for warmth like that. I pushed the door open. The room beyond looked exactly as I remembered it, and that was the problem. The bed was slightly rumpled, the blanket folded back as if someone had sat there moments ago. The desk lamp stood crooked, casting a soft, yellowish glow, even though I was sure it hadn't been plugged in before. A mug sat on the desk, faint steam curling upward into the air. The room was warm, alive. I stepped inside, my legs unsteady, my mind struggling to keep up. The air here felt different, heavier, like it belonged to a moment that hadn't finished happening yet. I reached toward the mug, stopping just short of touching it. The steam was real. Behind me, somewhere in the hallway, the floor creaked softly. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe, because I knew, without seeing anything, that I wasn't alone in the house anymore. And whatever had brought me back here wasn't finished with me yet. I stayed frozen in the doorway longer than I care to admit, letting my eyes adjust to the soft, unnatural glow of my sister's room. The warmth wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like the air itself had memory, holding on to every movement, every breath that had passed through here. I could feel it brushing against my skin, pressing lightly on my chest, making it hard to inhale fully. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the house, to drive until the fog swallowed me again. But something kept me rooted. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint hope that what I saw meant my sister was still here, somewhere. The floorboards creaked softly as I took another step inside. Each movement echoed slightly too long, as if the house were listening. I reached out toward the desk, half expecting my fingers to pass through air, but the lamp was real, warm to the touch. I lifted the mug and sniffed it carefully. Steam curled slowly, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded me of the pendant on the passenger seat of my car. Cold metal, old copper, a hint of iron. It shouldn't have been possible. Nothing in this house should have been alive anymore. And yet, the mug held warmth. The bed looked slept in, and the room, it remembered her. I took another step and froze as a noise drifted from the hallway. Not a footstep, not a creak, just a soft, deliberate shuffle, like someone shifting weight while trying not to wake anyone. My pulse jumped, my throat tightened, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. I had to convince myself this was just the house settling, that the noise was nothing, that I was imagining it. But the warmth in the room, the mug, the way the air seemed to press close around me, it didn't lie. I moved to the edge of the bed and traced my fingers along the rumpled blanket. Each thread felt familiar. The imprint of her body was still there, subtle but undeniable. I could almost feel the shape of her spine beneath the fabric, the curve of her shoulder where she had leaned. I swallowed hard, letting the memory fill me for a moment before I reminded myself I had to stay focused. She wasn't here, not in the way I wanted, and something else was, something else entirely. The camera I had left on the table flickered in the soft glow of the lamp. The red recording light blinked steadily, its glow almost reassuring, a small tether to reality. I picked it up and aimed it around the room slowly, trying not to disturb whatever invisible presence lingered. Shadows clung to corners and furniture edges, stretching unnaturally, pulsing slightly as if breathing. And behind them, something shifted. A faint outline, the suggestion of movement where none should exist. I blinked. It vanished. I blinked again, still gone. But I felt it, aware, watching, waiting. I stepped closer to the desk. On the surface, a small sketchbook lay open. I didn't remember it being here before. The pages were filled with crude drawings in pencil, simple shapes, stick figures at first, but then the sketches became more detailed, familiar. Rooms I recognized from the house, paths through the forest, a figure standing at the edge of the driveway. And then, in the corner of one page, a drawing I could not ignore. A figure, taller than her, faceless, standing behind another figure, smaller, hunched. The smaller figure was unmistakably her. The larger figure was watching. And in the way it was drawn, it was almost breathing, alive on the page. The sound of shifting came again from the hallway, closer now, deliberate and measured. I could hear the faint rhythm of it, like slow, careful footsteps, back and forth, pacing. I gripped the camera tighter, feeling the warmth of the pendant heavy in my pocket. The rhythm of the steps was familiar. Not just familiar, precisely like the way my sister had walked in the room when she was nervous. My mind raced, heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. But it was, learning, mimicking, or worse, it had remembered. I moved toward the door cautiously, trying to glance into the hall without turning my head too much. The hallway stretched long, shadows pooling unnaturally along the walls, thick and dark, moving slightly when I looked away. The door at the far end, the one that led to her old closet, was slightly ajar. I could feel the energy behind it, a pull so subtle it was almost a vibration against my chest. I dared not approach too quickly. The air grew warmer still, like a tide, pressing against me, demanding attention, demanding recognition. I realized the house itself, or whatever presence lingered in it, had begun to notice me. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, tickled the edge of hearing. A whisper? A rustle? The hairs on the back of my neck rose, prickling like static electricity. I tilted the camera toward the sound, and for the first time, a shape became visible. Not a full body, not a shadow, but an outline, translucent, faint, standing still just beyond the edge of light. It was small, slight, hunched in a way I would have recognized anywhere. My sister, or at least the echo of her. The room seemed to breathe with me, walls pulsating subtly, responding to my every movement. The outline shifted closer, just enough to be noticed, never more. My fingers shook, trying to hold the camera steady, trying to convince myself I wasn't hallucinating. But then the outline disappeared entirely, and the warmth receded slightly, leaving only the faint metallic tang in the air and the mug's steam curling lazily upward. I forced myself to move toward the bed again. The blanket was cool now where I had touched it, but the imprint remained, ghosted into the mattress like a memory pressed into the fibers of the room. And then I noticed it. A small handprint, faint and pressed into the dust on the windowsill. Small, child-sized, fresh. I froze, unable to breathe for several seconds. The air shifted again, heavier this time, pressing against my chest. The faintest whisper drifted past my ear, soft and deliberate, carrying a single word I almost recognized. Not a scream, not a name, but an acknowledgement, a presence. Someone or something was here, and it had been waiting. I stepped back slowly, reaching for the door handle. My legs refused to cooperate fully, stiff with tension, with fear, with anticipation. Behind me, the floorboards groaned softly, though I hadn't moved a step. The room had taken on a life of its own. Shadows shifted, shapes pulsed along the edges of vision, and the warmth, it remained, lingering as if tied to the very air around me. The house had not finished revealing its secrets. Not yet. And I understood with a clarity that froze me. Leaving had never been an option. Hollow Creek was no longer just a town. The house, the valley, the fog, the shadows, they were all connected. They were aware. And I had returned to something that would not release me. I moved carefully through the room, every sense on high alert, feeling the weight of the house pressing in from all sides. The warmth was still there, subtle, clinging to my skin, as if the house itself were trying to guide me somewhere I didn't yet understand. I took a tentative step toward the desk, careful not to disturb the mug, careful not to draw attention to myself. But the house seemed alive beneath my feet, each creak in the floorboards carrying a message I couldn't yet read. The sketchbook on the desk caught my eye again. I had thought I had seen everything, that every drawing and mark had been accounted for. But the pages had shifted. A new sheet had appeared at the front, carefully drawn, almost perfect in its clarity. It showed the house from above, the layout precise down to the floorboards, the cracks in the walls. In the corner, a figure stood in the hallway, small and hunched. The pencil strokes were darker here, deliberate, almost like the hand that drew it had weight. As I studied the figure, I realized it was holding something in its hand, a pendant. My pendant. I dropped the camera slightly, heart hammering. My fingers hovered over the page, afraid to touch it. But the moment I leaned in, the lines on the page shimmered slightly, like graphite dust stirred by a ghostly breath. I recoiled, stepping back. The floorboards groaned in response, and a whisper floated along the walls, soft, indistinct, almost like the wind through the cracks. But I knew better. The house never made accidental noises. I turned toward the hallway. The air there shimmered subtly, heat and cold warping together like a mirage. Time here didn't behave as it should. The second hand of the wall clock ticked backward for a moment, then returned to normal. I blinked, and the coffee mug I had set down seemed to shift slightly on the desk, closer to the edge than I remembered. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. The house was replaying moments that weren't real anymore, folding past and present into one. A low sound echoed from the closet at the end of the hallway. Not a creak, not a tap. A long, drawn-out sigh, like someone exhaling slowly after holding their breath for years. I approached cautiously, each step deliberate, forcing myself not to run, not to look away. The closet door was slightly open, just enough to see inside. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and shapeless. But in the middle, a faint outline of a figure pressed against the wall. It wasn't moving. It was just waiting, watching. I swallowed, moving closer, and noticed details that made my stomach knot. The figure wore the same dress my sister had worn the last time I saw her. Its hair fell across the face, shadowing its features, but I could make out the subtle tilt of the head, the way the shoulders slumped slightly. Familiar posture. I realized with sudden horror that the figure wasn't just mimicking my sister's voice, It was mimicking her entirely. Her gestures, her mannerisms, her presence. And yet, it wasn't her. Not exactly. Too perfect, too deliberate, alive in a way that no memory could be. I stepped back, almost tripping over the rug at my feet. The air grew warmer, pressing in around me, heavy and thick. I could hear it then, a soft creak from the ceiling above, slow and measured, like someone pacing. The shape in the closet had not moved, but I felt its awareness, an intelligence that seemed to know I had seen it. It had been waiting for me to notice, to acknowledge it. And now that I had, the house felt as if it had exhaled. I picked up the camera again, angling it toward the closet. The red recording light blinked steadily, grounding me in reality. I could feel the outline of the figure through the lens, though its edges flickered like a candle flame. My stomach churned as I realized it wasn't just standing there. It was mapping me, studying me, learning me. Each breath, each blink, each small adjustment in my stance was being absorbed and recorded. The warmth shifted toward the pendant in my pocket. It pulsed slightly, a low vibration that thrummed against my palm. I realized then that the sketchbook, the figure, the room, the house itself, they were all connected through the pendant. It was more than a keepsake. It was a key, a magnet, something that tethered me to this loop of time and memory. I could feel the pull stronger now, urging me to move toward the closet, toward the figure, toward the moment that had frozen here long ago. I moved forward reluctantly, stepping closer to the closet door. Shadows reached outward along the walls, stretching toward me like dark fingers. The outline inside seemed to breathe, shifting imperceptibly, folding space around it. I could sense the weight of it, the gravity of its attention, and the room seemed to bend slightly toward the figure, like it had pulled the walls closer in preparation. I stopped just short of the doorway, chest heaving, hands trembling, feeling the pull of time stretching and compressing around me. Then the air changed. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the faint hum of electricity before a storm. I felt it in my bones, in the hairs along my arms and neck. The warmth receded slightly, replaced by a cold awareness, a pressure that seemed to weigh on my mind. And then I heard it clearly, a whisper, soft but deliberate, floating along the edge of the room, the closet, and the hall. Not words, not quite, but a tone, a cadence, unmistakably familiar. It carried memory, recognition, something alive that shouldn't exist. The sketchbook trembled slightly on the desk, its pages fluttering, though no wind touched them. The shape in the closet shifted again, just a fraction, tilting its head as if acknowledging me. I swallowed hard, stepping back. The room itself seemed to contract, shadows pooling thicker, pressing against the edges of the light, and I understood that this was no longer just my sister's room. It had become a space where time itself remembered her, or something that wanted to be her. The temperature pulsed, warmth and cold trading places in seconds, leaving a ringing in my ears. I backed away, reaching for the door handle. Behind me, the soft creak of floorboards above reminded me the house was still moving, still alive. And as I turned, I realized I wasn't leaving the room. The room had me. And whatever waited in the closet was patient, aware, and learning. I took one last step toward the doorway. The outline shifted closer, not stepping but sliding somehow, a subtle movement, a presence that didn't obey gravity or expectation. I blinked, and it vanished completely. The warmth left my skin abruptly, leaving a chill in its place. My pulse raced. The pendant vibrated sharply in my pocket, almost like a heartbeat. I realized then that this wasn't a room. It was a trap, a record, a memory folded into space, and I had just become part of it. I stepped through the doorway, leaving the room, leaving the mug, leaving the sketchbook. For a moment, the hallway felt normal again, but the awareness lingered. The figure was still there, somewhere, observing, waiting for the next movement. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter where I went next, the room, the closet, and the shape within it would follow me, watching, learning, remembering. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and twisting, shadows pooling along the walls like ink spilled across old wood. Every step I took seemed heavier than the last, as though the house itself pressed down, measuring my progress, assessing my awareness. The air was thick and warm, wrapping around me like a living thing, and I felt it nudging me forward toward the stairwell that led to my sister's old room. The pendant throbbed faintly in my pocket, pulsing like a heartbeat in sync with the house, guiding me, tethering me. I paused midway, my gaze caught by the mirror leaning against the far wall. It had never been there, or at least I hadn't remembered it. The glass reflected the hallway, distorted slightly, edges bending unnaturally, like it belonged to a world just beyond my own. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the reflection. Small, hunched, familiar. I blinked. It was gone. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was my imagination, a trick of the light. But the air had changed, denser, heavier, charged. I could feel awareness pressing down on me, something studying me through the reflective surface, something learning. My pulse quickened, a rhythm that seemed to echo in the walls, in the floor, in the pendant itself. I edged closer to the mirror, careful not to break eye contact with the hallway behind me. My reflection stared back, slightly off, just enough to unsettle. The figure appeared again, now standing slightly behind me, mimicking my stance perfectly, down to the tilt of my head. I turned sharply, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. The reflection didn't lie. The figure moved with me, mirrored me, anticipated me. It was learning, watching, adapting. I swallowed, gripping the camera tightly, hoping to capture what my eyes alone could not. The red recording light glowed, grounding me in something real, something solid. I raised it slowly, keeping the lens trained on the mirror. The figure remained, its edges flickering, breathing in time with me, shifting slightly with each movement I made. Its posture, its tilt, the way it held itself, it was uncanny, perfectly, horrifyingly, like my sister. The temperature shifted again, warmth rising along my spine. I could feel the shape in the room without seeing it, an unseen presence tracing the contours of my body. The hallway around me seemed to pulse, walls stretching and compressing imperceptibly. Shadows pooled thicker near the edges, and I realized that every movement I made, every small adjustment, was being recorded. Not by the camera, but by the room itself, the shape, the house, all of it. I stepped closer, forcing myself to examine the mirror. My reflection wavered. The figure behind me leaned forward slightly, tilting its head the way she used to when she was curious or worried. Its movements were deliberate, rehearsed, precise. Not a ghost, not a memory. Something else entirely. Something intelligent. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to obey fully. It had measured me, and it was patient. The pendant vibrated sharply, pulling at my pocket, tugging me toward the stairs. I realized that the shape had no need for words, no need for sound. Its presence was communication enough, a warning, a test. I moved slowly, deliberately, keeping the figure in sight. It mirrored my steps perfectly, shadowing me, studying me, learning every detail. Even in the dim light, I could see the subtle differences, the flicker of its form, the way the edges blurred unnaturally. It was a copy, but a growing one, becoming more coherent with each passing moment. I reached the base of the stairs. The air grew warmer, heavier, and the reflection in the mirror pulsed like it was breathing in time with me. My chest tightened as I realized I could feel its gaze on me even when my eyes were averted. The hallway and the mirror were no longer separate. They were joined, a single observation point, a net of awareness waiting for me to falter. I stepped onto the first stair, the boards groaning beneath my weight, and the figure followed, perfectly aligned. It had learned the way I moved, learned my balance, my hesitation, my fear. I ascended slowly, heart hammering, every nerve on edge. The stairwell stretched before me, the air shimmering faintly, each shadow bending, twisting, pulsing. Mimicked the pause, tilting its head, mimicked the pause, tilting its head slightly, as though acknowledging my recognition of it. A connection formed, silent, tense, dangerous. Reaching the top of the stairs, I felt the warmth peak, thick and suffocating. My sister's room door stood ahead, slightly ajar, faint light spilling into the hall. The outline of the figure remained in the mirror, pressed against the edges, but it was no longer entirely humanoid. Parts of it stretched unnaturally, angles that shouldn't exist, edges that flickered and shimmered. A reminder that this was no longer just imitation. It was evolving, adapting, learning to exist within the boundaries of our world, one step at a time. I approached the doorway slowly, camera ready. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. The air vibrated faintly, carrying an echo of breath I hadn't taken. I knew that the figure, whatever it was, had followed me fully, and it waited. Not hostile, not yet, but patient, observing, calculating the exact moment I would falter. And when I did, it would act. I crossed the threshold into her room again, the warmth wrapping around me like a second skin. The bed, the desk, the mug, all exactly as before. But I sensed the figure, aware in some hidden corner, unseen yet present, studying me, learning me. My pulse raced as the realization sank in. Whatever it was, it knew me. Not just as a visitor or an observer, but as someone it could imitate perfectly. Every movement, every hesitation, every instinct, it had learned them all. I took a tentative step toward the desk. The sketchbook lay open, its pages fluttering slightly, as if stirred by a wind I couldn't feel. The figure in the mirror shifted again, almost imperceptibly, tilting its head, leaning forward, tracing my actions. It was a predator in training, a mimic, but it was waiting for something. My next move, my next mistake, the moment I let my guard down. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that the lesson it intended to teach me would come sooner than I wanted. The air thickened around me, pressing against my chest, as if the room itself were aware I understood the danger. I swallowed hard, gripping the pendant, feeling it pulse like a heartbeat, syncing with the figure's silent attention. Shadows moved slightly at the edges of the room, flickering across the walls, stretching, bending. The warmth and cold traded places rapidly, leaving a ringing in my ears and a chill across my shoulders. And then, almost imperceptibly, the figure blinked in the mirror. Not me, not my reflection. It blinked alone. I froze. It had learned the simplest, most human action, and that meant it was no longer just a copy. It was becoming something else entirely. The blink lingered in my mind longer than it should have. A simple movement, insignificant on its own, yet it carried weight, intent. I stood frozen, staring at the mirror, unable to trust what I was seeing or what I might see next. My reflection remained still, eyes wide, breath shallow. But behind it, something shifted. The figure didn't blink again. It didn't need to. It had already proven its point. The room felt tighter, smaller, as if the walls had crept closer while I wasn't looking. The warmth returned in waves, rolling through the air in slow pulses, each one heavier than the last. I could feel it in my chest, pressing inward, sinking with the dull vibration of the pendant clenched in my fist. The metal was hot now, uncomfortably so, but I couldn't bring myself to let go. It felt like the only thing anchoring me to myself. I turned away from the mirror slowly, every nerve screaming that I shouldn't. The room looked unchanged. The bed, the desk, the lamp, the mug, still steaming faintly, impossibly. But the silence had deepened. Not empty silence, expectant silence, the kind that waits for a response. I took a step forward. The floorboard beneath my foot creaked softly, and immediately, somewhere behind me, another creak answered. Perfectly timed, perfectly matched. I stopped breathing. Another step echoed, delayed by a fraction of a second, like a recording played back just slightly out of sync. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was rehearsing. The pendant throbbed sharply, sending a jolt up my arm. Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine alone. My sister standing in this room, pacing near the window, her fingers brushing the desk absent-mindedly, the way she used to pause before speaking, as if choosing the exact right word. These memories didn't feel recalled. They felt projected, pressed into my thoughts by something that had studied them carefully. Then I heard it. At first, it was only breath, a soft exhale, close enough that I felt it brush my ear. My body locked in place, every muscle rigid, heart slamming against my ribs. The breath came again, slower this time, deliberate, familiar. My sister's breathing. I turned my head just enough to see the edge of the mirror in my peripheral vision. The figure was closer now, no longer standing fully behind me in the reflection. Its outline overlapped mine, slightly offset, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. The edges of its shape flickered less than before. It was stabilizing. The breath came again, followed by the faintest sound. Vocal cords shifting, preparing. "No," I whispered, the word slipping out before I could stop it. The response came instantly. Not spoken aloud. Not yet. But I felt it. Pressure against my thoughts, a careful probing, testing the shape of my fear, my resistance. The room hummed softly, a low vibration beneath the floorboards, inside the walls. The house wasn't just a setting anymore. It was a participant. It was listening. I backed toward the door, steps slow, deliberate. Another step echoed behind me, perfectly synchronized now. No delay, no hesitation. It had corrected its timing. The first word came quietly, almost gently. It was her voice, not distorted, not hollow, warm, familiar, exactly as I remembered it from childhood, from late nights when she couldn't sleep and talked just to fill the silence. I didn't leave. The sound didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the doorframe, breath ragged, vision blurring at the edges. Hearing her voice like that, stripped of context, stripped of body, was worse than any scream. "I'm still here," the voice continued, closer now, layered, as if spoken twice at once. "You just stopped looking." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, anger and grief twisting together. "That's not you," I said, louder this time, forcing the words out. "You don't get to use her voice." The pendant flared hot against my palm, and the room reacted. Shadows rippled along the walls. The mirror cracked slightly, a thin fracture spreading from one corner like a spiderweb. The figure recoiled in the reflection, its shape warping, stretching unnaturally, as if the resistance surprised it. For a moment, the voice faltered. Then it changed. It adapted. "You always say that," it said softly, this time layered with something else, something older, colder, less careful. "Before you listen." The pressure in my head intensified, memories bleeding together. I saw flashes of moments I didn't remember living, standing in the hallway at night, watching her door, hearing whispers I had ignored, feeling watched long before she disappeared. The realization hit me like a blow. This wasn't new. Whatever lived here had been present long before I returned, before she vanished, before I left. It hadn't taken her. It had learned from her. The figure stepped closer in the reflection, overlapping my silhouette completely now. For a brief, horrifying second, I couldn't see myself at all. Only her shape remained, staring back with eyes that didn't reflect light correctly. Too deep, too aware. The voice lowered. "You came back because you remembered," it said, "and now I remember you." The door behind me creaked open slightly, though I hadn't touched it. Cold air spilled in from the hallway, breaking the oppressive warmth just enough for me to breathe again. I stumbled backward, crossing the threshold, tearing myself away from the room. The voice didn't follow immediately. It didn't need to. As I stood there, gasping, heart racing, I understood something with terrifying clarity. It didn't need the room anymore. It had my voice, my movements, her memories, and it was learning how to use them. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, shadows pooling and stretching like liquid, twisting at impossible angles. My chest burned, every breath sharp and uneven, every step a calculated risk. The room behind me, the one that had held her memory, her warmth, her absence, seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, holding its breath while I moved through the house. I knew then that the shape wasn't confined to mirrors or reflections. It didn't need a body. It existed in the air, in the wood, in the walls themselves. The pendant throbbed violently in my pocket, heat stabbing at my hand as if warning me not to move. Every instinct screamed to leave, to flee, but I couldn't. Something tethered me here, some unspoken thread connecting me to the figure I could not see, but felt everywhere. I glanced at the mirror one last time. For a moment, I thought it was empty. Then I blinked, and it was there, closer than before, standing just behind me, or maybe inside me. I couldn't tell. Its edges blurred, shadow and substance interwoven, forming the perfect imitation of my sister. Every subtle gesture, every tilt of the head, every silent breath, it mirrored her, yet carried a strange wrongness that pressed against my mind. I realized with a shudder that it didn't just copy, it learned. Every flicker of fear, every hesitation I displayed, it stored. Every blink, every glance, every heartbeat. I forced myself to look away, toward the stairwell. The pendant's pulse surged, guiding me, urging me. I stepped toward the stairs, slowly, deliberately, and felt the air shift behind me. The figure was not following, not physically. It didn't need to. The house carried it, folding space and memory around me, making it present wherever I went. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. Shadows rippled, stretching unnaturally across the floorboards. My reflection remained in the mirror, normal this time, but I didn't trust it. I couldn't. And as I moved, the warmth pressed against my back, almost tangible, as if fingers traced along my spine. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, unmistakable in its familiarity. "You can't look away." Not my sister's voice this time. Something layered beneath, older, colder. Beneath the imitation, the thing that had learned her patterns, her gestures, her breathing, waited. It was patient, measuring me, anticipating the next mistake. I reached the staircase and paused, hand on the railing. Every floorboard groaned beneath my weight. Shadows flickered, stretching unnaturally along the edges of my vision. The warmth shifted, focused on my pocket where the pendant rested. Its vibration was stronger now, insistent. Not a warning, a pull, a tether, a signal. I glanced back at the mirror again. The figure was gone, or so I thought. The hallway looked empty. The mirror reflected only me. I blinked. It appeared. Standing at the top of the stairs, not in the reflection, not behind me, there. The form hovered impossibly, edges blurred, eyes deep and patient. Its presence didn't scream or attack. It simply existed, waiting for me to flinch, to falter, to blink again. I realized with cold clarity what that meant. Every time I blinked, even for an instant, it could slip closer. Every second I hesitated, it learned more. The house had prepared it. The pendant had anchored it. My sister's memory had taught it, and now it was ready. I swallowed, my hand tightening on the railing. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to leave. But I couldn't move fast enough. The figure, patient and calculating, had already anticipated it. I blinked, and it was gone. Not vanished, hidden, waiting, studying, remembering. The warmth of the room lingered faintly in the hallway, and the shadows pulsed subtly, like a heartbeat, like a warning. My chest ached, my mind raced, and I understood one thing with absolute certainty. The shape wasn't confined to the house. It wasn't just a reflection or a memory. It could be anywhere I let my guard slip, anywhere I blinked. I had thought leaving Hollow Creek meant safety. I was wrong. And as I stood there, trembling on the staircase, the faintest trace of a child's giggle echoed from somewhere behind me. Impossible and familiar, carrying the promise that the nightmare had only just begun.